Welcome to Ink and Flame, and today we are sitting down with Maddie Rose Andry, and she's going to talk about her soon-to-be-released Mortal End. Hi, Maddie.
Hello. Hi. So I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. So welcome to the podcast, and first of all, we're going to have a fantastic evening. I had to throw that in.
Why not?
Exactly. So first off, tell us where you are coming to us from.
I'm in Indiana. So in the Midwest, kind of the heartland, or in the heartland.
Nice. And how are you feeling today? How are you doing?
I feel great. I'm so excited. The release is around the corner. I would say I feel super excited and also very sleep deprived.
I imagine. So is it excitement keeping you up?
It's excitement. It's tasks. It's making sure I've got all of my T's crossed and I's dotted and, book descriptions the way that I need them to be and all the formats are where I want them to be and doing all the social media content that I want, working with my street team. So excited to get this out and just coordination and juggling. My PA and I are like, okay, so it releases and I already have a day schedule where I'm just going to nap. It's a nap.
That's perfect. Phone's on Do Not Disturb. Please do not.
Yes.
That's awesome. So were you always a storyteller at heart?
I'd say yes. As a kid, I think I wandered a lot in the woods. Interestingly enough, I had a pet wolf. We didn't know he was a wolf. We thought he was a stray dog that wandered up. And he wandered up when I was about 7. We didn't figure out that he was a wolf until I was about 11 when we took him to the vet. And the vet almost had a heart attack because we brought a wolf into his office.
Wow.
His name was King, and he was amazing. And King and I would wander through the woods with some book that I was reading. I actually started reading Stephen King at the age of 7. Not really appropriate, but I loved it. So I gravitated towards horror movies and horror novels as a young kid. And so I would usually have a Stephen King novel in my backpack and some food and a notebook and a pen and my wolf. And I would wander out through the woods.
I imagine you felt safe.
I did. Oh yeah, totally. He was kind of almost like a familiar.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. So much fun.
I think you kind of already answered that. You were reading Stephen King at the time, but did you have any other favorites?
I was really stuck on Stephen King for a while at that younger age. As I kind of got into high school, I started taking more honors literature classes. And so I gravitated into some more of the classics, fell in love with Dante's Inferno. Again, more of that Gothic-y type.
Mm-hmm.
Fell in love with Shakespeare. I did show choir and then I was also in drama. And so I loved acting and, performing. And so anything that was theatrical, I was all about it. And so that's kind of the stuff that I gravitated towards. And as far as my writing back then, I was writing more poetry. So more of that kind of the emotional feel and I wrote tons and tons and tons of poetry. And that's where I kind of started until, I just naturally evolved into more just structured writing, more creating characters and things like that.
Right. So some of your poetry, was it mostly teenage angst based?
I had a lot of teenage angst. And it's for really, really good reasons. So, yeah. And that kind of actually my whole life story kind of bleeds into my career and my life journey and the path of, what led me here today.
That's kind of my next question is your career merges so many unique elements. So do you want to talk about those?
Yeah. So I grew up with a pretty challenging home life and I moved out when I was 15 years old. So I've been on my own since I was 15. Went graduated from high school early, out of necessity because I needed to work and I started college early. And so then I graduated from nursing school really young. And so I was actively seeing patients by the time I was just before turning 19, started seeing patients and I was on the floor and I noticed in working with patients that the one thing that just kind of kept coming up was these patients that were getting admitted. I was working on a med surgical floor, and that's kind of a floor that collects a lot of different things. Like I had gunshot victims and stab wound victims. And then I also had cardiovascular, like heart attack victims, stroke patients. And then, I would end up with, some psychiatric overflow and, med surg just kind of collects a little bit of everything. I had cancer patients and things like that. And, one of the things in working at that time, I was working night shift. And so one of the things that just kind of kept evolving as I talked to my patients in the evening when things kind of slowed down, I was just getting to know them because they're inpatient and they're lonely. Not everybody had family members with them and things like that. And one thing that was kind of becoming more of a chronic thing was that they had tough childhoods. They had really horrific trauma. And I was curious about that because obviously I had been diagnosed with a complex post-traumatic stress disorder at the age of 14 and had suffered from fugue states, blackouts. It's really hard when you black out in the middle of a Target.
I imagine.
And then you wake up and there's this group of strangers around you and you're like, okay, that happened. And you don't have any recollection, right? It's really hard to kind of go through that, and kind of go through that alone. And so watching my patients have similar experiences, I really wanted to help them because I didn't want them to go through it alone like I did. So I did some research and found a thing called an ACE score. And it's an assessment that we do that really measures 10 different categories of early adverse childhood experiences is what ACE stands for. And you get 1 point for every category that you can say yes to on this 10 categories. And research really shows that the higher that score is, the more at risk the person is for depression, anxiety, drug abuse, addiction, being in and out of jail, or even having cardiovascular disease, cancer, long-term health problems. And so that's what I was seeing was even these patients with diabetes or cancer, their ACE score was through the roof. And so I got really curious at that. And so that's where my career really evolved. And I got certifications in trauma recovery. And then I also got a relationship coach certification. And I did that because broken early attachment bonds is probably one of the biggest causes of why we suffer long term. So our early caregivers, mother, father, grandparents, whoever helped raise us, if we didn't have a healthy bond with somebody, it's a broken early attachment bond. And we tend to repeat those cycles with our intimate partners, our friendships, and our professional lives, and even with ourselves. That harsh internal voice, it repeats. And so I really wanted to help people develop healthy, functional attachments with themselves and with their relationships. Because if we have healthy relationships, then we have a happier life. And that's kind of how it evolved.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did that lead to or become your writing?
So I also have a literature degree with a minor in fine arts because I actually was going to go to school to be a physician. So I was in med school. And life took me to Chicago and I decided that I didn't want to be a doctor. My passion has always been in the creative world, drawing, writing, performing, doing things like that. That's what I wanted to do. So I switched my major and that's when I really started writing. What I want to do is take all of this experience that I have with helping people one-on-one and sink it into a fiction world where people who use escapism as a way to get away from whatever it is that they're getting away from, where they can maybe grow and evolve and, be seen and heard through the character's lens. So whatever character that I'm writing, they're going to have a traumatic backstory, which all fairy tales do. Come on, let's talk about Disney, Lion King, Bambi. Traumatic backstory is a big thing. So
it really
you can pretty
is.
much guess if you ever pick up one of my novels, that is going to be a trope. All of my characters are going to have a horrific backstory. Because it's part of it's part of our, we naturally suffer. It's inevitable. We're going to go through some type of suffering and it gives us something to evolve from. It gives us something to overcome. It gives us something to gain resiliency from. And so that's really what I wanted to do was I wanted to write a character who people could relate to. I also wanted to write a villain that people could feel sorry for and hate at the same time. And just kind of weave that into some of the things that I've seen because I've worked with people that it's were they born bad or were they made bad because of what they went through? And so that's the question that gets asked a lot in the psychiatric world is nature versus nurture. Were they born this way or were they made this way because of what they went through? And so a lot of that ends up in the pages in the novel. And so I write a character she's 29 years old. She's a psychiatrist and she has PTSD herself. And so getting to write about that mental health representation, one from my own personal experience, it's palpable. I've had people say it's graphic. I would like to say that it's visceral, because from a trauma aspect, the things that happen to people when they've been traumatized, whether it's a car accident or some kind of thing that they've gone through, whether it's sexual assault, domestic violence, whatever. Traumas are different than what people think they are. I can tell you, there's really 4 components to a trauma. Is that you feel powerless. There's nobody there to help you. You surpass your coping mechanisms and your expectations were violated. That's all it takes for your brain to say that was a trauma. And so it's a lot simpler than what people think it is. It doesn't have to be some massive car accident. It doesn't have to be a huge sexual assault. It doesn't have to be anything like that for your brain to say, oh, I've been traumatized. Okay. And what happens to us when we go into fight or flight is all of our senses go into hyperdrive. So our sense of smell goes up. Our tactile sense goes up. What we taste goes up. What we hear goes up. So all of our 5 senses just go it's really ramped up. And so when I'm working with people with traumatic experiences, they don't, and your brain doesn't remember things in chronological order. It's like your memory just turns into this big blob. And so when I'm working with people, it's always, what did they taste? Or there's a smell that they get stuck on, or say they were in a car accident. It's the sound of the breaking of the glass, or it's the sound of the screeching of the tires, or it's the smell of the burnt rubber, or it's the tug of the seatbelt on their chest, and it's that tactile thing. And so when I write from the aspects of what a trauma would be like. So it's visceral. So when we have like a fight or flight reaction, it's a visceral response. It's those 5 senses kicking in. And so some people who don't understand what happens to us when we've been traumatized, would call it graphic, but it's actually visceral, because you can actually feel what the character's going through, because it's literally what happens in the human body and in the brain when we go through those events.
Wow, that's fascinating. I feel hypnotized right now.
Yeah, it's really and that's one of the things that I've studied a lot of is neuroplasticity of the brain. And so that's what I actually do with clients when we're overcoming trauma, is I'm actually helping them rewire their brain and the neurons in their brain. That's actually how I overcame my own CPTSD. It's kind of the whole mind over matter, but I had to learn to rewire my brain. And that's diving into those different senses. What were the triggers? A big trigger for me was the smell of Old Spice. And that's actually what made me black out in a Target, was somebody walked past me wearing Old Spice and I was gone. I remember the Old Spice, and then I remember waking up. That's all I remember. Stale alcohol, huge trigger for me. So it doesn't trigger me anymore because I've rewired my brain, but those were the things that were big triggers for me when I was younger. And so if you think of olfactory, right? Like the olfactory sense is what I smelled. And for whatever reason, for me, the olfactory sense of things, that was a way bigger trigger for me than sounds or some other things or tactile things. It was a lot of smells for me. So I had to go back into my brain and rewire my brain at those smells. I wasn't in danger if I smelled Old Spice. So I wasn't in danger if I smelled stale alcohol.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I know, right? And so I weave that into the fiction world. So as you're reading the characters and what they're experiencing in the scenes, I do write very visceral. So you'll get to places in the book where my main character is going through things, and I write, what is she feeling tactilely? What is she hearing? What is she tasting? What is she seeing? And I write from that aspect.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay. When you were reading, when you were younger, did you have any literary influences or authors that really got your attention or even helped put you on this path?
I would say, especially in high school, Laurel K. Hamilton released her Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series in 1994. I fell in love with that series and it as they were coming out. I was a big fan of James Patterson, so I really liked his crime mystery, Kiss the Girls, which then got turned into a movie with Morgan Freeman. Loved all of that. So I read a lot of that after I kind of shifted from Stephen King. Trying to think if there was anybody else. Again, really went to the classics. I started doing, when I started doing my literature degree, I really got into just Gothic literature. So Wuthering Heights, Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I freaking love Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So if anybody hasn't read that, like, it is such a beautiful portrayal of what we do as humans, where we have a public persona and a private persona, and how we hate those darker sides of ourselves. And that's really what Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is all about. And I love that one, just because it kind of touches on like some of the psychology aspects. I fell in love with a lot of the classics, and I studied Shakespeare for over a year in college. So I love the fact that his comedies just means nobody dies.
It's true.
Just like the morbidness of that, right? Like, I love, again, I'm a very dramatic person. Like, I did drama and show choir, and I love to perform. And I love I love digging into like kind of those deeper, complex humans. I love it. I love getting into that.
Wow. Okay. What about, how did the idea for your Gothic medicine come about?
Yeah. So Gothic medicine is, again, kind of plays into what I was just saying about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? So Gothic is just anything literature wise. Gothic is really diving into those deeper emotions that humans naturally feel ashamed of, right? Things that we feel like we should suppress. Mm-hmm. When the truth of it is like shame and guilt and self-hatred and all of those things are there, right? Along with hopefully some love and emulation and, some of our passions and things like that. They're all there. And they should coexist, right? We shouldn't try to suppress one or the other. And that's one of the beautiful things about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorites. It really is about that balance of learning to love yourself unconditionally. And so Gothic is kind of diving into almost what we call that shadow material, or the darker side of the human experience and things like that. And medicine is really just the art of healing. So however we choose to do that, so I do that in my medical practice, but I also want to do it in fiction, because escapism in fiction was a huge thing for me as a child. Like, writing and reading books and wandering into the woods and doing all that stuff saved me from the horrific reality of my childhood. I think that's why I gravitated towards horror as a child, because the monsters in the pages helped me process the terror that I felt on a daily basis, that something horrific was going to happen to me or my mom or my brother. Helped me kind of process that fear in a safe way, because those monsters and villains and bad guys, they weren't real. Okay. So I got to process the emotional, complete the trauma response in a controlled environment. And I think it saved me in a lot of ways. And so that's kind of what I want to do with writing now. And so that's really what Gothic medicine is all about. I'm going to dive into the deeper emotions. All of my books are going to be adult fiction. And sometimes people struggle with what is young adult, what's new adult, and what's adult fiction. Young adult is for teenagers that are, starting to dive into some of those deeper-ish emotions for their age. New adult are people who are just moving out of home and they're trying to figure out what adulting is all about. And so you're kind of getting a little deeper into the emotional state, like the decade of the 20s is a decade I would never want to go back to. It is so hard, that transition. No, thank you. So I personally, as an author, will probably never write new adult. I hated my own personal experience with the 20s, hated it. So I won't write it. That's why my main character is a 29-year-old female verging into the 30s, right? But adult fiction, that's when you've shifted out of those trying to stumble your way through life, and you have a little bit more of a handle on your emotional state, and there's a little bit more resiliency, and you're stepping into that rebirthing process. So you're letting your childhood go, you're evolving, you're growing, and yet you're being reborn. And so that's what I love about adult fiction.
Oh, okay. I'm being, every answer you gave, I'm just staring at you while you're speaking, because it's incredible.
Oh,
I
thank
love
you
it.
so much.
So your debut novel, Mortal End, is packed with dark, vibrant themes and cursed vampires. We're already hooked because Paul and I love vampires. When did you get the idea for the book? When did you first get the idea for the book?
Yeah. So the book was actually finished in 2009. Yeah. It's been sitting on a shelf for 16 years.
Wow.
So it's finished in 2009. I have been a huge vampire junkie, everything. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer, fell in love with it. I was actually introduced to Buffy the Vampire Slayer by one of my college professors. I never even watched it. My college professor was like, who was trying to get me to publish back then. She was like, no, you absolutely have to watch this show, because she was my Victorian lit professor and then also my Gothic literature professor. And she was like, no, watch this. And I like binge watched it. And it was just like, it was so good. But just absolutely love vampires. And I'll go into that a little bit more why, but I finished it back in 2009. I actually went to Eugene, Oregon, which is the setting of the book. And I stayed for 7 days, and I wrote a lot of it on site. So I was on location. There's a part in the book, my chapters are titled, and it's called Cherry Tree. And the tree is real. It does exist. It's a real tree in the Owen Rose Garden. And I remember I was walking around with a backpack, same kind of thing I did as a kid. There's usually always a notebook on me. Now it's my phone, right? It's notes and it's pages and it's things like that. But I'm writing no matter where I'm at. As soon as I get inspired, something comes out. And so back then it was a notebook and a backpack and all this other stuff. And I walked up to this tree and I just started sobbing. This is like this 200-year-old cherry blossom tree held together with stilts and wires. And it was in full bloom, freaking gorgeous tree. And yet it looked grotesquely tortured. Like it looked like a tree that wanted to lay down and die, but we wouldn't let it. And I just like dropped to the ground, pulled my notebook out and started writing. And I was sobbing and the tears were splattering on my notebook. And that's where in the book, Denise gets turned into a vampire, and she connects with this tree in the same way that I connect with this tree. And if you know what cherry blossom trees signify in Japan, they are beauty and violence, death and rebirth. That's what they signify. That's why it's on the cover. So it's like, she's like, I mean, this tree is just, and it's still there. It's so freaking stunning. And here's this woman who's this human woman who's being attacked and getting turned into a vampire. She wants nothing more than to give up, but she's fighting and all these things are going on. And so she's connecting with the torture and the beauty of this tree. And it's really her only connection to the world so that she can numb out to what's actually happening to her. Not long after that, I was driving down the coast, right? And I was just in my husband, my now husband, was driving down the road, and I was just sitting there writing, and I happened to look up, and I was like, I just need a sign for where I go next. And I looked up, and there was a sign that said Devil's Churn. And I was like, stop. And it was like, okay. And we got out, and I went over, and it was like, my gosh. And I wrote another scene there. And it was just the way that the Devil's Churn is, the water is just so chaotic. And and it's eroding into the earth the way it kind of like tunnels in. And it's actually really dangerous. Since I wrote this back in 2009, somebody's actually died there because they slipped off because it tunnels down in and it's really dangerous. And so but just the power that comes off the Pacific Ocean, if you've never been, it's just out of this world. And that's why I went there to write the novel. And I sat on the beach on the coast and wrote so much of this dark, gloomy, gothic, vibey book sitting on the beach with my hair getting whipped around and like in this like turbulent environment. And so it's palpable. You can feel it in the book. So that's really how it was born. It didn't get published because I tried to traditionally publish it. Indie authors didn't really exist back then. And I worked on that for like a year and a half. I don't think the world was ready for me because I'm a little intense. I don't think the world was ready for me. And that's okay. And then I ended up in a domestic violence situation. So I had 2 children, and then I almost died in 2013. And I became a single mom with 2 kids under the age of 2. And so my dream of becoming an author, that table
took a back seat.
Yeah, we shall.
Yeah.
They needed to go on the shelf. And then I was a single mom for quite some time. Yeah, it took some healing from that. And I worked on my own trauma recovery at that point. I love my girls and I had to take care of my girls. And I was so grateful that I was alive to get to be a mom. And that became my priority. So I took time to raise them. They're now 11 and 13. And it was just back in May of 2024, I was like, it's time to dust her off and bring her to life. And I rewrote it. So I started and I completely rewrote it in 4 weeks, got it to an editor, and here we are.
Amazing. Okay. I've had a couple moments where the things that you've said have just triggered so much of a reaction for me. It's just amazing. I can't wait to listen to this again.
And that's really what the advanced readers who have read it, my street team is amazing. It is a group of women who have just absolutely fallen in love with the story. And I love interacting with them and getting to know them because they're emotionally invested in my characters and me, and my journey. And it's palpable. And I just feel really blessed.
I really love the dynamic of street teams, to be honest with you, because I read a lot when I was younger, and it's only been in the last 2.5, 3 years that I came back to it because, life. And so Instagram taught me what street teams were because I didn't even know. And seeing them and what they do and how they promote their writer, their author, I love it. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's having this group of, amazing human beings like rally around me because they believe in me and they love what I do and what I've written. It is a found family, which is one of the tropes that's in my book. And it is one of the most surprising blessings that I've gotten out of deciding to publish is just finding them. So just in awe, like on a regular basis, just how fabulous having them in my life is. Yeah.
So we've kind of taken on a few different answers.
Yeah.
I guess
here.
Yeah, you kind of swallowed up a couple with that part. I guess writing vampires can be a little bit different for some people. Vampires have changed over the years. We're not just the blah, what suck your blood vampires anymore. We've evolved a lot, and there's a lot more to vampires. What draws you to them to begin with? And then what is your favorite aspect of the ones that you've created?
Yeah, I feel like vampire history and lore, honestly, and I don't know how much you looked into it because you said you and your husband love vampires, but they actually started out as kind of a monstrous villain for everyday people to blame for unexplained blood diseases that their medicine didn't understand. So people would get a blood disease that would cause bleeding from the ears and the eyes and things like this. And they blamed it on something supernatural. And that's kind of what gave birth to the vampire legends and things like that. Over time, they got a little bit more romanticized. And I think why we romanticize vampires just from a human aspect is that one of the things a lot of people fear is death because we don't know what comes after, right? And so this concept of this immortal being who gets to defy death, but the curse around that is you have to live off the living, right? I think we find that fascinating because it helps kind of curb that fear of death a little bit. And so when we get to escape into a vampire story that we've romanticized, that we get to alleviate some of that fear of death. I think that's also one of the reasons that, I've had multiple near-death experiences myself. And so I think that's the reason why I've been drawn to, vampires myself, is just that it is a natural human emotion to be scared of what happens. And grief isn't something that we get taught how to really process. It gets pushed under the rug. Like something happens to us and we're grieving and it makes the other people uncomfortable around us. And so then it's just like, I don't know. It's just like rub some dirt on it or, get up, brush it off. It's kind of some of those natural answers that we get from the people around us. And so then we don't actually ever get to really properly grieve. And so I think vampires give us a way to deal with that. I think for me, in writing them, I have found a lot of joy in twisting it up a little bit, because vampires are these soulless demons of like plagues on humanity. And I didn't do that. Those aren't my vampires.
Perfect. I can't wait to read it.
And I'm happy to share a little bit more about how it's different. And
yeah, please do. Let her rip.
I know one of the questions that you asked me was about the dark and broody. My vampires are definitely dark and broody. Not all of them, but my main male vampire, Emil, he's dark and broody. And then I made him British to boot. I have a ancient British dark broody vamp who's so much fun. And I really can't wait for the world to get book 2, because it is written from his point of view. I will say getting into his head has been one of the highlights of my life. I have really enjoyed writing him. But from that point of view, I got to use a little bit of like my own morbid sense of humor, that being in the healthcare world, I've had to deal a lot with death as patients pass away and dealing with families who are losing a loved one. I've been there for a lot of people's ends, and it's hard. And in the healthcare industry, you learn to detach from your patients so that you can maintain your sanity. And if you don't, you're going to end up anxious or depressed or so many other things. And so there has to be a healthy degree of detachment that you learn. And for me, it's been through sense of humor and dealing with my own mortality, right? So I have a lot of peace with my own mortality because I've been there when a lot of other people have passed away. And so dealing with that, I would say that's where a lot of my inspiration from my vampires have come from, is that I do have kind of this dark, morbid sense of humor that has come from my years of healthcare. I don't know if that's good or bad.
I'm positive that in your book, it's going to be awesome.
So yeah, that's how my vampires are a little different from that, a little bit.
Okay, so for listeners who haven't yet discovered Mortal-End, can you introduce us a little bit to the universe that you've created? I know that it's set in modern day.
It is.
So can you build a little bit on what aspects you kept from our world, or if it's all the same as our world?
It is modern day Earth. So the Cursed and Fated Vampire universe does take place in modern day Earth. Doesn't necessarily stay in this time frame. So we do go back and forth. The prologue actually starts in the 11th dynasty of Egypt. So 4,000 years ago, with our first creation of the first vampire in the mortal realm. So ends up being our villain. And, that's the one that I usually have people check content warning for, because it's intense. And that's where some of the female rage comes into one of the tropes. And if you want to skip the prologue, because the warnings are too difficult for you, I actually have a summary on my content guidance page. So if you go to my content guidance page on my website, it tells you at the top kind of some of the triggers that might be in there. If you decide that the prologue seems a little too intense for you, you can scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's a prologue summary where you could just like skip some of the like graphic details of what happens and then just go to chapter 1.
Cole's notes.
Yeah. Like it's like a little cliff note. All right. So you can skip it if you want, but it is modern day, but we do kind of go back and forth. We go back into when Templar Knights existed. We go back into ancient Greece. We go back into some ancient times in France. And so that has to do with the characters' developments and what Mortal-End is really all about. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like the creation of her, the vampire queen, her name is Sade, her creation's really intense, and that's the curse that kind of starts this ripple effect that really creates this cursed and fated universe.
That's a very different take. Most vampires kind of linger in the Christian faith a little. So I find that very interesting. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I weave a lot of different mythologies. So we're going to have some ancient Egypt mythologies. We're going to have some ancient Greece mythologies, some Spartan type things in there. There's Templar Knights. So there's a little bit of Christianity in there, but that's only with some of my vampires. I have a ancient Viking vampire that's in there. His name is Aiden. You learn a little bit about him. You learn a lot more about him in book 2. So yeah, it's a very diverse cast of like what their backstories are and where they came from and how old they are. And, it's well planned out.
So how did you research? What types of research did you do to dive into the history?
I think for me, just with my literature degree, again, I mean, I studied Shakespeare, but right along with Shakespeare, I had to study the times of Shakespeare. So Emile, you'll find he was turned in the 1500s. So he's a descendant from England around the time of King Henry VIII. And so that really ties into some of that time frame and things like that.
And did any of your characters kind of take you by surprise while you were writing them?
They take me by surprise. Not really. No. Like it's yes and no. The conversations come up. They talk in my head. It's really funny when you're like, I don't know what it is, but it's like it comes to me when I'm brushing my teeth or when it's not convenient.
When your notebook's on the other side of the room.
Yeah, where it's like I can't do talk to text because I have a toothbrush in my mouth, and I think it's because I'm like my mind is wandering then, and it's like I'm drifting off into the mystical. I know where the series is going. I know how the series ends. I know I actually have all of the series pretty mapped out. Now, do I know what the characters are going to do or the actions that are going to get me there? Not really. Those conversations kind of come up as I go, but I do have these weird conversations that will like pop up in my head. I'm like, oh, I got to write that down. I have no idea where it's going, but I have to write it down because it's going to happen. And then as I start to write, then I'm like, that's where that conversation goes.
That's awesome. That's so fantastic.
And it's fun.
And it's so true.
Yeah, it's just the way it is, right? And so do they surprise me? No, but do I let them kind of wander into their own organic evolution? Absolutely. Yeah.
Well said. So you describe Mortal End as an opera. What inspired the choice of term?
So I kind of already let you in on the fact that I'm dramatic at times. As I've told you, my male main character is British. And there are times I'll just slip into a British accent around the house and I'll just stay in character for like a week or two and drives my family completely nuts. So I'll do method writing at times, but opera for me just kind of highlights the Gothic realm, right? Gothic is dramatic. I mean, think about any Dracula movie you've ever seen. Seriously, like any of it. It is dark and it's broody and it's the music, right? Is just so palpable. And so that's really what this is. I mean, operas are romantic and devastating. And so it kind of takes you back to the cherry blossom, right? Beauty and violence, death and rebirth. All of that is in there. And operas are extravagant and they're theatrical. And I think with the way that I write, some of the reviews that I get are that people were able to actually visualize what was happening. Like it was playing in their head as they were reading. And so that's where opera really comes in for me, is that it is this grand emotional roller coaster filled with massive feelings and heartbreaking grief and death and rebirth and empowerment, unconditional love, and, you know, the ability to rise up. And I had one of my street teams members tell me that she felt like she was holding her breath and riding a roller coaster and waiting for me to rip the rug out from underneath her.
That's an awesome description.
Then after she finished the book, she messaged me and said, "You owe me a mattress and wine." And I was like, "Why?" She goes, "Because I'm not coming up from this cliff you've tossed me off of until you give me book 2. So I think that kind of sums up why an opera, of course, is fire.
So that brings us to our next question. Your vampires are layered, both cursed and fated.
Yeah.
What went into creating their mythology? You kind of touched on that, I guess, but explain the cursed and fated.
So there are brand new elements around my vampires and there are old elements around my vampires, right? I've revamped the vamp and I talked a little bit about them, you know, vampires not having souls. Well, they do in Mortal End. And a lot of this really, the cursed and fated theme really comes from the fact that this is mirroring more of my own human journey and what I've watched other people go through. And so there are moments in our lives that are really painful. And that's the curse, right? We go through these really painful moments that are like, we want them to just go away. They're so devastating. They make us feel like we're going to break. And We wonder sometimes if we are going to break. So really the layers of the cursed and fated is a reflection of the human journey. And we do have these moments in our lives that are really painful, and we break down with grief. We break down with despair. It feels like, it is going to, like, why us, right? That question, why us? Why me? And that's the curse, right? And I feel like there's this path to our grand destiny, which is our fate, right? So our fate, if we learn to mine and dig into those challenges that we go through that are painful, that bring up despair, that bring up grief, that's all about loss, it's all about heartbreak. If we can kind of look at it from a different perspective and see that it is a challenge that gives us an opportunity to rise and get onto the path that we're meant to be on, that's the fate. So this curse brings on this fate that really can make us into this resilient, fabulous human being that we wouldn't have been without the curse, right? So that's the curse and the fated, and that's why they're layered, because we all go through suffering. It's inevitable. It's part of the human journey. We suffer, we go through loss, we go through pain, and it does feel cursed, right? Like, why me? Especially if it happens over and over and over and over again. From my own human experience, there were many moments when I was like, again?
Yeah.
Really? I haven't been through enough. Why is there more? And so there were times where it's like, okay, I feel really, really cursed right now. But then when I really got to reflect back on some of the things and focus more on what did I learn? What did I gain from that? How did that make me a better person? How did that make me a more resilient person? How did I rise to that adversity? How did I overcome? I can look back at my childhood and those 9 out of 10 ACE score things that I can say yes to. I would not change anything that I've been through, because I would not be the person I am today without it. And I actually really like me.
That's amazing. And it's awesome. And to hear you say it too, because we don't say it enough, do we?
No. Like I love to hear somebody say, I'm awesome. I'm amazing. I love myself. And we get told that that's arrogant when really it's just should be truth. It should be truth. We forget to say, I love me. I love myself. I'm an amazing person. I'm good at that. Because really, for me, I think that's humility. It's not arrogance. When you can do something and you do it well and you share that gift with the world, then you're helping others. And when you can live in that place and say, this is my strength and I'm going to live in my power instead of trying to suppress my power and just, I'm going to be tiny and little, then you're depriving the world of your gifts. Don't do that. Yeah, you go out and you shine and you be big and you be bright and you do you, because you don't know the impact that you're going to have on somebody else, right? You don't know what your gifts are going to do and how you might change somebody else's life. You go do that. You should go do that. And that for me is humility. And if you really look into the concept around Buddhism, they talk about humility being this tree that's, riddled with fruit and the branches are low hanging, because the tree knows I have all of these resources for you to survive and sustain yourself for. I'm going to put it down so that you can reach it and you can access it and you can get it, because I know that I have that to offer. And that is humility, to know, hey, I'm this wonderful, beautiful, amazing person who can empower others, and I'm going to give access to the world for that. That's what that's about.
Oh, I'm in trouble. You're going to make me cry.
No, to do that. I try not to, but like one of my superpowers, I feel like one of my superpowers is lifting people up. I want to empower people. I want people to know that no matter what you've been through, whatever it is that you have, it is beautiful. Your scars, everything you've been through, it is beautiful. And that's what I got from that cherry blossom tree. It was all riddled and arthritic. And but it was still so stunning, so beautiful, the way it was hanging on to life and giving us flowers and giving us something amazing to look at, even though it looked tortured. And I was like, that is what human experience is all about. We are tortured and we are broken, and yet we are still beautiful. And I freaking love it. I love it. So that's my vampires,
speechless.
Cursed and Fated.
Sorry.
And that's my vampires, cursed and fated. They're cursed and fated, and they have souls, because I want them to reflect. I want them to reflect humans, right? And they're different because their souls are what give them their power. So the more powerful the soul, the more powerful the vampire. And so it's different.
Oh.
Yeah.
Deep breath. Okay. So do you have a favorite vampire moment or interaction, without any spoilers, if you can, that's especially memorable for you of
Yeah.
your writing?
hmm Yeah. My moment is my moment with Phineas. The moment that I wrote her transformation when she had her mortal end. If you haven't figured it out, that's what the title is. It's a little bit of that morbid sense of humor coming in. She dies. She dies. So the moment where she has her mortal end, like literally under the cherry blossom tree. That's what the covers. She has her mortal end under the cherry blossom. That's my
It's not
moment.
much of a spoiler if it's like right on the front cover.
It's right on the cover. It's fine. And it happens really early in the book, so we're not spoiling anything. It even tells you on the back that she gets turned into a vampire. Um, see, that's my moment. That's my moment when I got to die and be reborn with her under the tree. That's my moment. That moment still for me, it's ingrained in my soul, that experience of getting to see that all of the things that tree is so scarred and it is so riddled with knots. And like when I say arthritic, it looks arthritic. And there's so many wounds and places where you see that they've trimmed it and it's healed over and it's scarred over. And it looks so brokenly beautiful. And that was my moment when I wrote that. And I was like, I'm taking this woman who's so closed off, because she's so terrified to love, and I'm breaking her more, and transforming her so that hopefully she can thrive. And that was my moment when I realized underneath that tree that, like, no matter what we've been through, no matter what scars we have, no matter the pain that's still left to come our way, we have a choice. We have a choice whether it defines us and breaks us, or whether we have a choice to learn from it and evolve and be stronger because of it. And that's my vampire moment.
Every one of your answers just like resonates so loudly for me. It's amazing.
Okay. I love that. I mean, not everybody's going to love my book. It's not going to fit for everybody, but those are the people I'm writing for, the people who are going to be able to connect with her experience. There's an amazing quote that says, art is made to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comforted. That is my goal. It's on my website. Like, the people who have been disturbed, their life has been painful. It's been hard. I write to comfort them. And then the people who are going to read my book, who are going to find my book disturbing, it's because they need to be disturbed. They've gotten too comfortable. And it's okay. I'm okay with it. And they'll probably hate me for it.
And that's okay.
And I'm okay with it because they have the right. They have that right. Everybody has the right to love or hate whatever they want to. And I'm okay. I'm good with it.
Okay. So vampires are iconic in romance. Why do you think that they remain so timeless?
Vampires, I think, again, they're timeless because it kind of goes back to that fear of death that I think humans have. I've watched so many people struggle with the fear of losing their loved one. It's interesting. Towards the end, the person who's actually passing away is the person who's usually at peace. It's the people around them who are hurting because they're the ones that are being left behind, and they're the ones that are going to have to grieve. And we don't really know how to grieve. We don't get taught. And it's a skill that you have to learn. And so I think vampires are timeless because it helps us cope with, that fear. And that fear can be really debilitating for a lot of people. And so I feel like that's why they just keep resurfacing. And so that's really one of the reasons why in Mortal End, I write about vampires that do have a soul. I want them to reflect the human journey so that I can provide comfort to more people because they're more identifiable.
Okay. And how do you make your immortal cast feel fresh and unique for today's readers? I think you've talked a little bit about the changes that you've made, just a soul by itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So the journey into becoming a vampire in my cursed and fated universe is not like any other, like, oh, you bite them then you have to drink their blood, right? And as you're dying, then their blood takes over, et cetera, et cetera. Like we've read that so many times. My journey, without giving you like a whole lot of spoilers, is the process actually makes the human body immortal. And then the immortal soul then merges with the human body because now it has a place that it doesn't have to vacate anymore because the body's going to live forever. Therefore, the soul can stay. And so the process of immortality in the book with vampires is the regaining of all of your past incarnation. Yeah. So it's the concept of reincarnation and vampirism merging. Yeah. And so that's what I mean by the more powerful the soul, the more lives you've lived. So we talk about old souls, right? So if you've got an older soul that's been reincarnated over and over and over again, the more power potential you have as a vampire.
Okay.
And so that's
I'm
part
so
of the
excited for this book.
There's some spirituality type concepts in there, right? Because again, when we talk about our fear of death, we're scared of death because we don't know where we go, right? We don't know what happens after we die. Like we have religious ideas, but really at the end of the day, are we positive? And so I think that's why people are drawn towards vampires and things like that. And so for me, it was just a natural fit that you tie in reincarnation with immortality and being a vampire. And then, it's fun and it's different and it's new. And I really, really enjoy this getting to kind of go back and relive this past life regression. And that's what I mean by, yes, it takes place in modern day. It doesn't stay there.
Yeah. But does it?
But does it really? So we get to cross space and time a little bit. And then you throw in the element of a soulmate. Well, if you've lived past lives and this one soul that's been your soulmate forever, then that means you've crossed lives with each other in past lives. And so that gets visited in the book. So,
okay. So I was just about to ask that with regards to the romantasy tropes. And you talked a little bit about your found families.
Yeah.
But what types of tropes do you find in your book?
So much. So let's see. We've got found family. We've got soulmates. We've got feminine rage, morally gray characters. Definitely morally gray characters because I feel like that's a little bit more authentic to humans. We tend to, depends, like I abide by the rules unless somebody hurts my kids.
That laugh. There was this little danger in that laugh.
Yeah. That was the little bit of the maniacal mother bear laugh that comes out. Like, you mess with my kids, you might get a whole different version of Maddie.
Yeah.
So, like, that's where the morally gray comes out. Like, I was laughing because it's like, do I turn morally gray when my kids are involved, or do I just go straight morally black? I don't know. That's a question there. And so, yeah, like, there's that. Oh my gosh, there's so many. My street team's going to yell at me because they got this so soulmates, fated mates, gods, demons and goddesses and time travel, epic world building. Just there's so much. Definitely epic world building. And the romance is a huge, huge part in the book. And so I know.
What kind of romance is it? Enemies to lovers or found friends or?
So with my soulmate, it's definitely an instant chemistry kind of thing, with a slow burn kind of thing going on.
Okay.
Because again, my main character is a psychiatrist and Emil starts off as a vampire and their paths cross. And, there's definitely instant chemistry. Them coming together takes a little bit of time and it's fun. It's fun. I love writing romance because I'm a relationships coach and I work with married couples or just couples, period. They don't have to necessarily be married, but I work with intimate relationships. And so getting to write romance is so much fun.
Okay. So this is one of my favorite questions.
Mm-hmm.
If you could find yourself in Mortal End for just one day, what would you do?
Goodness, I would take all the powers, them all. So that's one of the things that's different about my vampires too, is they actually have the ability to have, some of them have elemental powers. So powers over like earth, fire, air, that kind of stuff. And some of them have psychological powers. So powers over emotions or the ability to see visions or the ability to absorb knowledge from touch, those kind of things. So I would want them all. give them all to me. I want them all. I mean, how much fun would that be?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Maddie's process with your writing. What does your writing routine look like?
Oh, so I am very much a creative vampire. Oh, my brain really is super active from about 11 a.m. noon. And then I will go completely berserk with writing, doing whatever for quite a long time, until my husband or somebody in my family is like,
Go to
are you going
bed.
to eat? You got to do something. You've been up here forever. And I'm like, oh, it's not been that long. And they're like, it's in 8 hours. I'm like, oh, okay. So I really do. I do travel into the mystical when I'm making these worlds, like I'm there. Oh, and then I kind of forget about the rest of the world around me a little bit. I'll write even up until like 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes. It's weird. A lot of the things that really came to me for Mortal End came to me in dreams. Like I would wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, and just start writing and whatever. And that still happens. I'll wake up and I'm like, there's conversation in my head, and I sleep with my iPad right beside, right over to the bed, so that if I wake up in the middle of the night and, somebody's talking to me, like it's almost like it's a mental health condition because they're whispering sweet nothings in my ear, and I wake up and I'm like, oh, I got to do this.
I have to answer them.
I have to answer them. It has to be done. So yeah, so it's, late morning throughout the day, all the way through the early morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
So coffee or tea? I have to ask that one.
Tea.
Tea.
Yeah. All kinds of tea. So I start with, I usually start with a black tea latte of some kind with soy milk. And then I'll switch to sometimes a matcha that then gravitates to like a green tea of some kind. And then I don't know if you've ever heard of twig tea, but it's really good for you. And then I'll drink some of that. And then it's really earthy and roasty. And then I'll drink some of that. And then I'll switch to, you can see there's a kettle sitting right behind me. And then I'll switch to, herbal teas, which is what I've been sipping on through this interview. As it gets later through the night, because I'm like, I'm going to try to sleep at some point, which never happens. When I say say that I'm sleep deprived, a lot of it is because either Aiden or Avery or Mora or Eden or, Dante or some of these characters are talking to me. Chrysos, who's my demonic god. He's a shape-shifting demonic god who's in the book. Somebody's talking to me, and so I don't sleep. They keep me awake. So I attempt to not have caffeine later in the day so that I can have the illusion that I might go to bed, but it doesn't usually happen.
Okay, so this is the question I've been waiting for. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm absolutely 1000% a plotter. I will say my street team I have members of my street team who have reread my book quite a few times already, because I hide eggs throughout the book. I foreshadow a lot, and it's going to crack me up when people get their hands on book 2, because they're going to be like, I have to go back and read.
Read two.
They're going to be like juggling back and forth, because like I said, book 2 is a parallel novel told from Emil's point of view. So the timeline overlaps book 1. And so I will probably put together a tandem read that will end up on my website for people, so that if they want to do, I know some people like to do tandem reads. I'll probably have a document up there for people like, read this chapter in Mortal End and then read this chapter in book 2 that I know the title of, that I would say. Not yet. And things that are happening in book 2, there are eggs planted in book 1. There's also usually eggs planted in artwork. There are eggs planted in the music that I play on my Instagram. There are things planted through the images of my videos on Instagram.
That's awesome.
So there are little hints everywhere. So I feel like sometimes like the wizard behind the curtain.
Well, you kind of are.
So it's like always like by my personal assistant, Laura, she's doing like alpha reads or whatever. She'll read something now. We work on a document. When I get these big eyeball emojis, like I know from her, she's like, oh, this is an egg. Like I know that means something. She's read enough of it now that she's figured out that she's like, that isn't an insignificant detail.
Okay, I'll know to keep my eyes open for it.
Yeah, it's fun. I like doing it.
So you just kind of alluded to this one, but do you have any kind of quirky writing habits? So you mentioned music.
Yes,
So let's go.
music is always on. So when I'm in a scene and I'm writing a scene, especially like when I get into the intimate scenes and I'm wanting to feel whatever it is that I'm wanting to feel, I will find the music that will invoke that emotion. If it's something that's going to make me want to cry or whatever. And I do the same thing with art. So, cause again, I have my minor in fine arts. And so I also draw. I've also already kind of drawn the cover for the second one, for the second book, but I'm too scared to put my artwork out there. I'm not as scared with my writing as I am with my own art. I don't know. There's some fear in there. So I don't know. I don't know. We'll see.
Don't
But
forget about the low-hanging fruit tree, remember?
I know. But I do have an amazing artist that I work with. And so I might just let her see it and like be like, what do you think? But when I'm writing, I will maybe try to find a piece of art that inspires me for the emotion and then have that up because I have two screens. So then I'll have that up on like one screen and then I'll play music and just trying to invoke. So again, people who follow me on Instagram will notice that my reels and things that I make, like they invoke emotion because that's just that's how I write. And that's what I do. And so when I say that I really do that for like the intimate scenes, when you kept saying, make sure you have headphones. I'm like, oh, my earbuds are always in my pocket. When I got my recap last year from like my Apple Music, I listened to music 75% of the year. So it's like, it's always on because I was writing all the time. It's for me, the intimate scenes are so palpable because I don't know if you know this, but like for relationships, there are three topics that are the no top topics that relationships usually get hung up on. And it's money, it's parenting, and it's sex. They're really uncomfortable and it's very taboo. And it's usually what causes the most discord in relationships. And so in my life, I talk about sex every day. So, we do a lot of hormone management in our medical practice too. So I also talk about sex because of that, because we're putting people's hormones back and their sex drives go up and all this other stuff. So I talk about sex a lot, like just in my profession, whether it's because I'm dealing with a couple or I'm dealing with somebody's hormones or whatever it is, like sex gets brought up on a regular basis. So one of my goals, even in my romance novels, is that sex is extremely taboo. Like it's very taboo. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And so that's why for me, my romance is open door and the physical of what's happening is visceral or graphic. Pick your word. I don't care. Is very descriptive. And, the emotions that go along with it are also very descriptive. Like, what are you feeling emotionally? What's going on? Is there a connection? Is there this? Is there that? And so, I have been told there's a bonus scene at the end of my book that is an intimate scene of Emil and Denise, which are my two main characters. And I have a few of my street team who've said they've read it like 15 times. So apparently I do a good job with those. They're not, when I rate the first book super spicy, I mean, compared to what I read, there's more world building, but I also like series where the spice goes up, right? I wasn't going to do like bang right out the door because where do you go?
Control expectations. Come on.
I have to, right? So one of the things that you do is you got to manage expectations. I would probably rate it anywhere between 1 and 3, depending on what Chili Peppers, depending on what you normally read, right? Like if you've been reading like Chantal Tessier, the Lord series, you're going to find my book a 1. If that's not like where you gravitate towards, I would say for me personally, just based on what I read, I would rate it a 2, especially if you want to include the bonus scene. The bonus scene is, it's.
But
So yeah, that's some of my quirkiness. I like to work in real world type things. And that's one of the ways that I do it. I'd like to take the taboo out of our sexuality.
and it needs to happen, I think, to
I
some
think so.
degree. Sometimes, time and place, I guess.
Yeah.
Especially when you're reading, you can definitely
Why not?
choose your own adventure for
Why not? Why not? Like, why not?
Exactly. So since Mortal End is your debut, what is it like to step into the world of publishing?
Exhausting. It's exhausting. I read about 200 books a year on top of what I do writing. And I feel like for me, we should be nicer.
Wait. Did you just say you read 200 books a year, plus you have written an entire book.
2 books.
Yeah, you edited the old version and then
I
you wrote
rewrote it. Yeah.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
you wrote the sequel and 200 books a year.
I actually read
Wow.
220 books in 2024.
How do you manage that in time? Because you have a full-time job.
Well, so I don't have a full-time job.
Okay. I feel better now.
Yeah, I don't work 40 hours a week. So when you do what I do, I see patients 2 days a week. The burnout factor for what I do with the type of people that I work with is really, really high.
Okay.
Anybody who works in psychology, any kind. I've seen my own therapist, and I've had a lot of lectures from my own therapist who I love and adore, who he's like, it's Maddie, it's not days and it's not hours. It's how many people have you seen?
Okay.
And he tells me, so I was like, oh, I'm doing 2 days a week. He goes, how many people did you see a day? And I was like, oh, well, I saw 11. And he's like, no. And so I've cut back quite a bit because I was pretty much work those 2 days. And then like the day after, because I work them 2 days in a row, I was pretty much catatonic for that day after. Like the recovery was just steep. The recovery is still kind of steep because I hold space for people as they are processing their heaviest emotions, right?
Yeah.
Like they're some of their most challenging moments in their lives. I'm holding space for them to work through and, redo some of that stuff. And it's, no matter how much I've gotten good at flexing those muscles of detachment.
Yeah.
It's still heavy. It's heavy.
For sure.
So 2 days a week. And then I do write 5 days a week.
Okay. That was part of my question because it's trying to create a balance between what you read and what you write. I find a struggle sometimes.
I do not read fantasy. So I stick in the dark romance. I love fantasy. Don't get me wrong. There are so many books that are fantasy that are on my TBR, but I do when I'm actively writing because I write in the fantasy world and I'm creating that mystical world. I cannot read fantasy. I can't. It's like my brain short circuits. Like if I don't come back into reality in some fashion, my brain's like, so like, that's why I'm like Chantel Tessier, like the Lord series, or I've been on a Rena kick lately. So I've been reading some of her stuff, because they're modern day real humans. There's no magical powers. There's no epic world building. Yes, do they build like a social, like platform?
Circle.
Like, yeah, like in the Lord series, like Chantel Tessier builds like a, the top 1% type social structure. So there's world building in that aspect, but it all takes place in like the world, right? Like nobody has fire magic or there's no dragons and there's no flying creatures and there are no gods or demons. Like that's my reality check. So yeah, so I do. And it's my meditative space. So since I was a kid, escapism is my way to check out from whatever's on my to-do list that I didn't get done that day. So yeah, diving into the publishing world has been.
Yeah, I forgot that was the question.
That was the question. We totally got sidetracked. I'm bringing us back. This is why I'm a plotter. I don't have ADD tendencies. I'll bring this back. But yeah, diving into the publishing world has been a steep learning curve. But I like to dive in and educate myself. I have found a network of people. I found an artist that I absolutely love. I found an editor that I absolutely love. I have found a personal assistant who I swear we share the same brain half the time. I mean, probably like 85% of the time. We will actually be texting each other the exact same thing at the exact same time, or we'll be on the phone together and we'll say the same thing almost at the exact same time. So just finding that tribe, like anybody who's going to dive into publishing, like finding your tribe is huge. I highly recommend that nobody ever try to do this by themselves. If you can manage to get a personal assistant, please do. If you can work on building your street team, please do. Because those are the people when you have a hard day, like they're there to cheer you on. They're there to lift you up. And if you don't have those people, and I have that in my editor, and I have that in my personal assistant, and I have that in my street team. There have been many days I'm like, I don't want to do this. And they're like, absolutely not. Like you said, that low hanging fruit. Absolutely not. You're going to do that. And we're all here because what you wrote changed my life. And so I'm like, okay, I'll keep doing it. And ow, it hurts.
They got you.
They do. They've got me. That mattress and the wine.
So what can you tell us about book 2, if anything at all?
Well, I can tell you some things about book 2. I can tell you some things. Too. So, like I said, it's from Emil's point of view, right? So we're going to go into Brush's head. So quite fun. And I really did get stuck like this for almost 2 weeks until my 11-year-old was like, Mom, can you please just talk like you? And then I tried and I couldn't. It's like my brain got stuck. So Emil Gannett is our MMC, and book 1, so Mortal End, is a single point of view told from Venice, Dr. Venice Jones. And so much happens in the background that Venice isn't privy to. She doesn't know about it. And Emil has been a vampire for a very long time. And book 2 had to happen. It was like knocking on my door. He's like, you got to tell my story. You got to tell my story. You got to tell my story. So my book 3 has already been started because originally that was going to be book 2. And Emil was just like, no, woman, you got to tell my story.
Let me out.
Let me out. You got to tell it. And so I decided I had to listen. Like the muses were screaming at me and I had to listen. And so book 2 is so much fun. It's told from his point of view. It's a 2-part book. So it has a part 1 and a part 2, which is different from book 1. Part 1 is the parallel to book 1. We do have a time jump that happens where the Japanese kind of summarizes a time period. And then we kind of get to our end. And part 2 of book 2, Emil fills in all the gaps of things that were happening because nothing big was happening for her during that time until the end. But for Emil, there's a lot going on.
I love that.
So,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So we get to learn a little bit more about him, and we also get to learn more about his cast of vampires. So again, that's Eden and Amora and Dante and Avery and Aiden. And those are the vampires that are kind of his clan of vampires that he's been with for hundreds of years. And they get mentioned. We learn little bits and pieces of them in book 1, but we don't get to learn a whole lot about them because, again, it's being told from Venice's point of view. In book 2, when we get to learn more about them and more about the vampire world and the Cursed and Fated, then we get to dive in and get to learn a little bit more about them. So it's a lot of fun.
Okay. So next question is a fun one too. If the movie cast had to be laid out, did you have anybody in mind?
Oh, this is such a hard question because actually I do want it to be turned into some film, something or other. Like I'm actually already in the process of working on trying to figure out how to make that happen. And it took me so much work and so many hours to pull these characters that I saw in my head and generate them into artwork. Because I have character art for all of them.
I saw it's beautiful.
Thank you. It was so much work that they don't look like they are so real in here. And so I don't really have anybody. And so it actually almost makes me kind of panic a little bit that I would have to hand these precious children over to some actor or actress to portray them. And so no, I don't have any actor or actress in my head for any of them. And I've actively tried to look and be like, who would it be? I think as it goes live and it's out in the world, I think readers will have ideas of who they are. Mm-hmm. And that will give me some influence because I've had a lot of reviews that have come back and they're like, oh, I can so see this in film. I can so see this in film. I can see it playing out in my head because my writing's very descriptive. And so I do very much want it to do that. And yeah, but no, I can't.
Well, that'll be half the fun. I think I remember when Anne Rice saw Tom Cruise, at first she's like, and then he took the character. She's, oh, that's my Lestat. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. So Anne Rice was a huge influence for me. And I never even mentioned her. So I think that's lovely. I feel like my writing's similar, in a way, just because hers was so dark and emotional. But yeah, like I would say, yeah, until somebody can show it to me.
Yeah.
And so
Be
that's why I'm
that.
hoping like some of my readers might be able to be like, oh, this person. And yeah, and actors and actresses, like you've only seen them in the roles that they've done. But it's
That's
like,
right.
if they were to read it, like, could they do it? Like you've seen like Henry Cavill, like go from The Witcher to Superman. And you're like, you could do that. So yeah, like who knows? Who knows?
That's right.
So that's exciting. I know one of the things that you talked about too is like the cinematic feel.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it would be dark and foreboding and moody, but it has to have a modern edge. And because it's both, the book is both. And so I kind of see it as when, because we're going to manifest this, when it makes it to film, it's going to be something that's going to it's going to be a rebirthing of the Gothic era, bringing it back to life. I would love that.
That is a fantastic ambition. I love that.
I miss it. I miss the
come
Gothic
back.
era. It has to come back. Like it's just such a dramatic piece of our, history as far as literature and, the drama world. Like we need it back.
I agree.
I don't even know if you know this. Most people don't know this, but Gothic literature actually paved the way for psychiatric medicine.
What?
Yeah.
Okay. Elaborate.
Yeah. So when they first started kind of writing about Gothic literature, some of the Gothic literature first started coming into play, and these authors started writing about more of these dark, moody type emotions that nobody wanted to talk about because it was taboo to talk about those things. And you didn't talk about those darker emotions or those personas that you didn't like because it wasn't polite to do that in society. And so they started doing that. And when that happened, people could really relate to those darker elements that was within themselves. And that's really when people started saying, oh, I have that. Oh, I have that too. Or, oh, I have that too. So they started normalizing the shadow self. And when the shadow self started getting normalized, these darker emotions that again, everybody has, but they were ignoring it because again, you don't do that in polite society. Yeah. You don't cry in front of people. When they started doing that and bringing out that and making that okay, psychiatric medicine followed not far behind.
Incredible.
Became more acceptable. Yeah.
And we're learning stuff still.
Yeah. So we're back to Gothic medicine, right? Like the healing through the art. There's so much healing in art. So much healing. If you've ever walked through an art gallery and something moves you or heals your heart, or like again, like just the art of nature, like what that cherry blossom tree did for me when I wrote the scene. Like there was so much healing and all of the beauty that's around us, whether it's in nature or something that an artist created or something that a writer wrote or something that a musician created or, even like DJs taking and mashing up different songs. Like I've heard some of the most crazy, amazing DJ pieces where they've mashed up different things. And I'm just like, man, just earth shattering. So just things that people can create. Just chills.
So I have to ask, do you have an image of that tree on your Instagram?
I do. Yeah. Like if you want afterwards, I can share it with you. I can send you.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. I can send you some of the reels that I've made of the cherry blossom tree. I actually have one where I found a TikTok video where somebody was actually there and she made a video. So her TikTok handle's still on the video because obviously I wanted to give her credit for making the video.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I actually remixed her video into one of my reels and did some writing over the top of it. But yeah, I'll share that with you because in her video, what I love over some of the images that you can find, you can see the wires and you can see the stilts and you can't really see it in the background, but the Willamette River is actually rushing behind. Like, so the sound of the river behind is just mesmerizing.
Glorious. Amazing.
That's so amazing.
Okay, so it's time for our rapid fire bonus question round.
Okay.
So just a little quick fun. Favorite Gothic romance or vampire novel of all time?
Dracula, without question.
Okay.
Love it. And then favorite romance book is Pride and Prejudice, without question.
Okay. What's harder to write, romance scenes or creating worlds full of magic and lore?
I actually enjoy both of them. I don't find them difficult. I think because I live kind of in this I live in a Maddie bubble. So I do. I live in a Maddie bubble. It's an interesting place to be. And so, yeah, I'm kind of halfway in the mystical anyway, most of the time. So yeah, I love the world building. I love my imagination. I love being there. And then I find relationships so just amazing. Like I love working with relationships. I love building relationships. Everything that we do is around relationships, whether it's parent, child, husband, wife, domestic partners, whatever it is, or it's professional, right? So your coworkers or your friends or your acquaintances, whatever we do, it's all about relationship. And so I absolutely I love that. Yeah, I can't say I find one harder than the other. I have so much fun. And one of the things is when I get to write them and then I laugh out loud. I get emotional as I'm writing it. Like I do exude a lot of emotion as I'm writing. I
Believe that.
emote. Yeah. Like it's there. It's palpable even for me. Before we even started our interview, one of my street team members is building something and she was asking for quotes. And one of the other street teams put a quote in there and I started laughing really hard. I was like, I wrote that. Best thing ever. Like, I was like, that's really good. And then I was like, I wrote that. Okay. That's awesome. I've already moved on. Like, I've moved on. Like, I'm writing book 3. Like, I forget. Like, they're like, oh my gosh, this is like my favorite quote. I'm so glad. But yeah.
Okay. So the next one is a little bit different. So vampires, witches, or werewolves. What's your ultimate supernatural creature? You wrote about vampires, so
vampires.
Yes, for
vampires. Sure. Honestly, I like them all. I won't spill any beans or anything, but like, we'll be visiting many things in the future.
Nice. Okay. And what fantasy item would you steal if no one could stop you?
The sorcerer's.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean,
fast and easy.
Sorcerer's stuff. Yeah.
Okay. So I have to ask: Are your daughters just as mystical as you, or are you?
Oh yeah.
Are you on your own?
My whole family's dramatic. Like when I start talking a British accent, my husband will join in.
Nice.
And then my 11-year-old is getting quite good at it. My 13-year-old is very good with the Southern accent, so she'll talk in a Southern accent when we do those. But no, we're all ridiculous.
It sounds very fun.
I'm pretty sure that my 11-year-old came from whatever planet, whatever universe, where all the rainbows, all the unicorn, all the glitter, all the sparkles, all the fairy dust. I'm pretty sure that's where she came from.
That's
my
beautiful.
My 13-year-old is very dark and broody. They're like polar opposites.
13.
She's good. She's very dramatic. She will literally throw herself on the floor and be like, "You're killing me. I'm dying." So no, we have a very dramatic. It's quite entertaining.
It sounds like a lot of fun.
It really is. We're ridiculous.
Paul asked me to ask, do you use scented candles while writing?
I actually don't use candles, but I do use a oil diffuser when I do that. And then, so there's usually an oil diffuser going on and I will use scents based off of like how when somebody's like, oh, this character smells like this or that character smells like that. I will make a blend of whatever essential oil that I'm dealing with my characters. So like if I'm in like Emil's head and what he smells like, then that's usually what's in my oil diffuser. So when I talk about method,
that's part of it.
Like I really do immerse myself in this whole world.
That's the way to do it. You get so much more out of it that way.
I mean, yeah, like I get so lost in it. I mean, yeah, but it's fun. I have fun.
It definitely sounds like you do. Have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons?
I have not. Surprisingly, no. But I will say when you talked about the plotters or the pantsers and then, there's these like games. I've never been a big video game person, but my husband got me into the Nintendo Switch Zelda game, Breath of the Wild. And I played that with a clipboard and paper. My husband's a pantser and he would be wandering. And I'm like, that's not where you go. This is what we're doing. If you could actually believe that Zelda Breath of the Wild could be a form of marriage therapy, you better believe it.
I'll have to keep that in mind.
Like, we learned so much about each other and how our differences did not vibe well. Oh, I was like, stay on task. And he's like, I want to do this. And I was like,
That's
no.
me and my husband in reverse.
It's so funny. He was like, I've never seen anybody play video games with a clipboard and paper. I was like, well, now you have.
And so last but not least, where can people find you? And would you like to show us your book?
Yeah, I mean, I have like flashed it a few times. So she's so pretty. And look,
You match.
I did match. My shirt does have the cover on it, but so it's going to be on Amazon. You're putting it in your store too, aren't you?
We are indeed. We have to wait
Yes.
for it to be released, but yes.
Yes. So and the paperback's not available on Amazon yet either, but it is on Barnes and Nobles. Yeah, the ebook's going to be there. You can find me on Instagram. I try to reply to everybody. So I do like to interact with my readers. I actually love it. Relationships.
And you were pretty quick. I was so
I
excited when you responded. So what's your handle?
Thank you. My handle is author Maddie Rose Andry. So just at author Maddie Rose Andry. And my website is Maddie Rose Andry. So it's just my name. So www.maddieroseandry.com. I'm the only one. I'm the only Maddie Rose Andry anywhere.
Well, that makes it easy.
Yeah, it makes it really easy to stalk me. Please, not in a weird way. Like, I'm okay. It's not a weird way. That's actually, that's one of the tropes in the book. You're possessive NMC. My street team's going to be so disappointed in me. But yeah, so my website is my name and, so is my just author, and Instagram's where I'm usually at. Like that's my social media of choice. And then I have a Goodreads page and I have an Amazon author page. So I'm pretty much sprinkled.
You're there. I can honestly say that I had no idea we were going to blow through 2 hours in such an absolutely stellar way. That was so much fun. And I really enjoyed talking with you tonight.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you, Tina. I'm honored. Thank you so much for reaching out to me and wanting to help promote this book, because it's a birthing process. Like this whole publishing and being an indie author, it's been kind of bittersweet. It's like watching kids grow up and setting them into the world, knowing that this is coming out and I've moved on to the next book. And then the book after that, the woman I was when I wrote Mortal End doesn't exist anymore. She's gone. And there's some grief in that. And I'm also really excited about where I get to evolve and who I get to be as I write book 3. Because, I'm also no longer the woman who wrote book 2.
And perhaps achieve your own immortality.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of one of the things that I talked about, right? Is even though she's gone, she gets to be immortalized in the pages of Mortal End. So, which is fun because it's a vampire book.
Yeah. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Well, thank you so much.
So much. And when book 2 does come out, maybe we can chat again.
I would absolutely love that.
Me too. Okay. So thank you so much. And to everybody, you now have how to find Maddie and what to look forward. So this will be likely airing on the 17th. So your book will have been out for a few days, but it does come out on the 11th. Yeah. And I know because it's literally written on my calendar in front of me. Now you know where to find her and what to expect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.